The first time I met the man everyone feared, I was the only person in the room who told him no. I did not know his name then. That was probably the only reason I had the courage to say it. My name is Sophie Miller, and until that night, the most complicated part of my life was keeping my family's flower shop alive while building a small event decorating business of my own. I understood roses, invoices, difficult clients, and Manhattan traffic. I did not understand men whose names could make an entire hallway fall silent. The gala was being held on the top floors of a luxury hotel overlooking Midtown. Rain streaked the windows, turning the city lights into blurred ribbons of gold and white. I had spent 9 hours arranging centerpieces, replacing damaged flowers, and making sure hundreds of details looked effortless. Shortly before the guests arrived, I carried a box of white roses toward a private hallway reserved for event staff. That was when I saw him. Tall, dark suit, calm expression. He was walking toward the restricted doors while 2 men followed several feet behind him. Nobody stopped him. In fact, a hotel manager who had been talking beside me suddenly stepped away. I noticed the red sign on the door, then looked at the stranger. "Sir, you cannot go through there." The hallway became strangely quiet. He stopped. Slowly, his gray eyes settled on me. "I cannot. Staff only." I shifted the box against my hip. "The guest entrance is around the corner." One of the men behind him looked at me like I had just made a terrible mistake. The stranger did not seem offended. If anything, he looked curious. "And if I use this door," he asked, "then I have to explain why I let someone ignore the rules." His gaze stayed on mine. "You would stop me?" "I am trying to." Something almost like amusement touched his expression. "What is your name?" "Sophie." His eyes dropped briefly to my event badge. "Sophie Miller." You could have just read that first. This time, I definitely saw the beginning of a smile. Before he could answer, the hotel manager hurried toward us. "Mr. Callahan, I apologize. We were not expecting you through this entrance." Mr. Callahan. The name meant nothing to me for approximately 3 seconds. Then I noticed everyone else. The lowered voices. The careful distance. The way nobody interrupted him. I had heard the name Vincent Callahan before. Everyone in New York had. His family controlled businesses across the city, but people spoke about their influence more quietly than they spoke about ordinary wealth. Vincent never needed to announce his authority. Other people announced it by the way they behaved around him. My stomach tightened. "You are Vincent Callahan." He tilted his head slightly. "Now you know. That would have been useful information 30 seconds ago. Would you have answered differently?" I thought about it. No, his eyes sharpened with interest. That should have been the end of our conversation. Instead, several guests appeared at the far end of the hallway. Among them was an elegant woman surrounded by people who seemed determined to impress her. Vincent saw her, and something in his expression changed. Not fear. Calculation. He looked at me again, then at the flowers in my arms. "You work the entire event. Until midnight." "Good. Why is that good?" He stepped closer, not enough to crowd me. Only enough that his next words belonged to me instead of the hallway. "Because I need someone who does not care who I am." I stared at him. "For what?" He glanced once toward the approaching guests, then returned his attention to me. His voice dropped into a quiet whisper. "Pretend to be my wife." For several seconds, I genuinely believed I had misunderstood him. "Excuse me." Vincent Callahan did not repeat himself immediately. He simply watched me, calm as ever, while my entire ordinary life seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Then he added, "Only for 30 days. I should have walked away. I should have laughed. Instead, I asked the question that would change everything. Why me? His answer came without hesitation. Because 5 minutes ago, you were the only person here willing to tell me no. The second time I told Vincent Callahan no, I knew exactly who he was, and somehow that made the word easier to say. I stared at him in the hotel hallway while rain traced silver lines down the windows behind us. No, Vincent barely reacted. You answered quickly. You asked a stranger to pretend to be your wife. I adjusted the box of roses in my arms. How much consideration did you expect? His eyes stayed on mine. More than 3 seconds. Then you were optimistic. The elegant woman I had noticed earlier was getting closer, accompanied by several guests. Vincent glanced toward them, then back at me. Walk with me. Is that another request? Yes. That surprised me enough to follow him toward a quieter alcove near the ballroom. He did not touch me or block my path. He simply stopped several feet away and gave me room. 30 days, he said. You mentioned that. You would attend several public events with me. Nothing more than what we agreed to beforehand. Why do you need a wife for 30 days? For the first time, his expression became completely serious. My family has spent months arranging an alliance they believe will protect certain business interests. An alliance? A marriage. I looked toward the woman across the ballroom and understood. Her. Vincent did not answer, which was answer enough. And you cannot simply refuse. I already have. Then refuse again. A faint trace of amusement crossed his face. That was my preferred solution. What happened? They assumed I would eventually change my mind. I almost laughed. You do not seem like someone who changes his mind because people expect it. I am not. So why involve me? Vincent looked through the ballroom doors. Because refusal leaves room for negotiation. A wife does not. The logic was outrageous, but I understood it. In his world, apparently, even relationships could become strategy. Find someone else, I said. Someone from your world. That would create another alliance. He paused. I need someone outside it. And you decided that person should be the woman carrying flowers in a hallway? I decided it should be the woman who corrected me before she knew my name and did not apologize after she learned it. I hated that the answer sounded almost reasonable. Almost. There is still a problem, I said. I have a life. You would keep it. I have work. You would keep that too. My family has a flower shop that needs me. His expression changed so slightly, I nearly missed it. Then the arrangement would work around your responsibilities. I narrowed my eyes. You sound like you already thought about this. I think quickly. That is not comforting. This time he actually smiled. It disappeared almost immediately, but I saw it. You would be compensated, he said. I shook my head. I knew money was coming. It is a professional arrangement. Money does not make strange ideas normal. No, but clear terms make them safer. He reached into his jacket and handed me a simple white card. One name was printed beneath his own. Daniel Reed. My advisor will prepare everything in writing. Your schedule, your boundaries, your right to end the arrangement. I looked up. My right to leave. At any time, even if it causes problems for you. Vincent answered without hesitation. Yes. That was the first thing he said that genuinely unsettled my assumptions about him. A man who could make an entire hallway quiet was offering me an exit before I had even entered his world. Why? I asked. Why give me that much control? His gaze sharpened. Because if you stand beside me, Sophie, I need you to do it by choice. Somewhere behind us, glasses chimed, and the ballroom filled with applause. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I already knew what the notification would be. Another reminder from the bank about the flower shop account. Another number I had been trying not to think about. Vincent noticed my expression, but did not ask. I am still saying no, I told him. Then no is your answer tonight. He stepped aside, clearing my path. No argument. No threat. No attempt to make me feel small. I started walking away, then stopped. What if I wanted to read the agreement? Vincent looked at me. Reading is not agreeing. I glanced at Daniel Reed's card in my hand. Good. Vincent gave a single nod. Tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. I turned back toward my flowers, telling myself I was only going to read a contract. Nothing more. But as I walked away, I realized the most dangerous thing about Vincent Callahan was not that he could make people obey him. It was that when I refused, he let me. I thought signing the agreement would be the hardest part. Then Vincent Callahan told me the one rule he believed could protect us both. At 10 o'clock the next morning, I stood 40 floors above Manhattan in an office so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Daniel Reed greeted me at reception exactly as promised. He was probably in his early 40s, dressed in a navy suit, with the calm patience of someone accustomed to explaining Vincent Callahan to confused people. Reading is not agreeing, Daniel said as he placed a folder in front of me. I recognized Vincent's words immediately. He told you to say that? He told me to make sure you understood it. I opened the folder. The agreement was surprisingly simple. 30 days. Several public appearances. No requirement to abandon my work or move permanently into Vincent's home. My family would not be involved. My private life remained private. I could refuse any event with reasonable notice, and I could end the arrangement at any time. This is not what I expected, I admitted. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What did you expect? Something that required 3 lawyers and my soul. He almost smiled. Mr. Callahan prefers clear agreements. Then I reached the compensation page. My breath caught. The amount was enough to stabilize my family's flower shop, cover months of overdue expenses, and give us room to breathe again. I closed the folder. He knows about the shop? Daniel paused for half a second. Mr. Callahan understands that 30 days of your time has value. It was not exactly an answer. I noticed that. I want one change. Daniel picked up his pen. Tell me. The money is payment for my time. Nothing else. He does not own my schedule, my decisions, or my silence. Daniel wrote without hesitation. Agreed. And if I leave early? You keep payment for the time already completed. I stared at him. He agreed to that? He insisted on it. That made no sense to me. Vincent had every advantage in this arrangement, yet the contract kept giving me doors I could walk through. 20 minutes later, the office door opened. Vincent entered without announcement. Nobody rushed behind him. Nobody needed to. Daniel stood, but Vincent gestured for him to remain seated. His attention moved to me. You came. I said I would read it. And I looked down at the signature line. I thought about my mother pretending not to worry when bills arrived at the flower shop. I thought about how hard I had worked to keep my own business growing. Then I thought about Vincent stepping aside the night before when I told him no. I picked up the pen. 30 days. 30 days, he confirmed. I signed. Daniel gathered the papers and quietly left us alone. Vincent walked to a cabinet and returned with a small black box. He placed it on the table between us. Inside was a simple diamond ring. Elegant. Nothing excessive. Somehow that made it feel more real. This is for public appearances, he said. I lifted it carefully. The metal felt cold against my fingertips. You really planned everything. Almost everything. I looked at him. What did you miss? His expression became unreadable. There is one condition that is not in the contract. I immediately set the ring back down. That sounds suspicious. You can still walk away. What is the condition? Vincent remained silent long enough to make me uncomfortable. Then he looked directly into my eyes. Do not fall in love with me. I stared at him. Then I laughed. I genuinely could not help it. That is your condition? Yes. You say that with remarkable confidence. It is not confidence. Something in his voice changed. The humor disappeared from mine. Then what is it? Vincent glanced toward the windows, where Manhattan stretched beneath a pale morning sky. Experience. One word. Nothing more. But for the first time since meeting him, I heard something beneath his control. Not arrogance. Not authority. Regret. I picked up the ring again and slid it onto my finger. You do not have to worry, Mr. Callahan. His eyes returned to mine. Vincent, if we are supposed to be married, you should probably call me Vincent. Fine. Vincent, I am not going to fall in love with you. He looked at the ring on my hand, then back at me. Good. I should have noticed how quietly he said it. I should have wondered why a man who seemed afraid of nothing needed that promise from a woman he barely knew. Instead, I believed the condition would be the easiest part of our agreement. I had no idea it was the only part neither of us would be able to keep. I expected Vincent Callahan's world to frighten me. What I did not expect was how quickly it would teach me the difference between being feared and being respected. 3 days after I signed the agreement, I stood inside Vincent's Manhattan residence wearing the ring he had given me and wondering how 30 days could already feel longer than my entire ordinary life. The apartment occupied most of the upper floor of a quiet building overlooking Central Park. Nothing about it was flashy. Dark wood, tall windows, clean lines. Everything seemed chosen for purpose rather than attention. Even the silence felt expensive. Daniel Reed had spent the morning preparing me for our first official dinner as a married couple. Names, businesses, family connections, questions people might ask. I had memorized our simple story, but Vincent seemed completely unconcerned. You are not nervous? I asked as we waited for the elevator. No, of course not. He glanced at me. Are you? I am about to walk into a room full of people who probably know more about you than I do. They know my name. The elevator doors opened. That is not the same as knowing me. I remembered that sentence when we arrived at the private club 20 minutes later. Conversations did not stop when Vincent entered, but they changed. Voices lowered. People straightened. A man near the entrance immediately stepped aside without being asked. Vincent acknowledged him with a nod and kept walking. Nobody announced his importance. They did not need to. I felt dozens of eyes move toward me. Stay close, Vincent said quietly. I looked at him. Is that an order? He paused. A suggestion. Better. Something shifted in his expression. Almost a smile. We crossed the room together. Introductions came quickly. Senators, developers, attorneys, people whose names appeared on buildings and charity boards. Yet there were others nobody introduced. Men and women who spoke quietly with Vincent for less than a minute before leaving through private doors. Nothing openly threatening happened. Nobody raised a voice. That somehow made his influence feel more real. People did not obey Vincent because he demanded attention. They seemed to arrive already knowing where the lines were. Then an older businessman named Charles Mercer asked me a question about my work. Before I could answer, he smiled at Vincent. I assume Sophie will be leaving the flower business behind now. Vincent looked at me instead of him. He waited. It took me a second to understand what he was doing. He was giving me the answer. No, I said. I like my work. Charles chuckled. Surely you will not need it anymore. Need and want are different things. His smile faded slightly. Vincent lifted his glass. Sophie made herself clear. Nothing about his voice changed. But Charles immediately changed the subject. Later, when we were alone near a window, I turned to Vincent. You could have answered for me. Yes. Why did you not? He looked genuinely puzzled. Because he asked about your life. Most people in there seem to expect you to decide everything. Most people in there are not you. The answer landed harder than it should have. I looked away toward the city lights. You are confusing. I have been told. By people brave enough to say it. Very few. I smiled. Then your social circle needs improvement. This time he smiled back. It lasted only a second, but it changed his entire face. On the drive home, Daniel called about a meeting scheduled for the following morning. Vincent listened, then said, "Move it." After he ended the call, I asked why. You told me your mother has a medical appointment tomorrow. I stared at him. I had mentioned it once while reviewing my schedule. You remembered? Yes. So you moved your meeting? Our agreement works around your life. I said that from the beginning. I looked out the window because I did not know what else to do. I had spent 3 days preparing myself for Vincent Callahan to become controlling. Instead, he kept doing something more dangerous. He listened. And as Manhattan passed beyond the glass, I realized the first crack in my certainty had already appeared. The condition I had laughed at no longer seemed quite as ridiculous as it had 3 days ago. The first time Vincent Callahan defended me, he never raised his voice. Somehow, that made everyone listen more carefully. By the end of the first week, pretending had become easier than I wanted to admit. I knew which entrance Vincent preferred, which events Daniel Reed considered important, and exactly how long Vincent would tolerate meaningless conversation before finding a reason to leave. I also knew he drank coffee black, disliked being photographed when he was not expecting it, and always thanked the person who brought his coat. Those details bothered me because they made him human. It was easier to remember his condition when he was simply Vincent Callahan, the man whose reputation could change a room. It became harder when I started noticing the man underneath it. Our next dinner was held at a private restaurant overlooking the East River. Fewer than 30 guests attended, but Daniel had warned me that almost everyone there had influence somewhere. I wore the ring, stayed beside Vincent, and reminded myself that this was work. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Then I met Margaret Hale. She was elegant, polished, and perfectly pleasant until she learned what I did for a living. Flowers? She asked. Event design, I corrected. Flowers are part of it. Her smile remained fixed. How charming. Vincent has always had unusual taste. I knew exactly what she meant. I also knew reacting would give her what she wanted. I will take that as a compliment. Margaret looked toward my ring. This must be quite a change for you. 1 week you are arranging centerpieces, and the next you are sitting at tables like this. Before I could answer, Vincent spoke beside me. Sophie was invited because she belongs here. Margaret turned toward him. Vincent, I meant nothing by it. Then there should be no difficulty meaning something better next time. His voice remained calm. No anger. No humiliation. Just a boundary placed so cleanly that nobody could pretend not to see it. Margaret excused herself a moment later. I waited until we were alone near the windows. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. I could have handled her. I know. Then why step in? Vincent looked across the room. Because handling disrespect and deserving it are not the same thing. I stared at him. You always talk like that. Like what? Like every sentence belongs on a courthouse wall. A quiet laugh escaped him. It was the first time I had heard the sound. Not the controlled half smile he gave people in public. A real laugh. It disappeared quickly, but something inside me shifted with it. There, I said. What? Proof that you are capable of enjoying yourself. Do not tell anyone. Your reputation would never recover. Later, I noticed a young server struggling to carry several trays while a guest complained impatiently. I stepped over and helped move a vase blocking his path. It took less than 10 seconds. When I looked up, Vincent was watching me from across the room. He said nothing. On the drive home, however, he asked, "Why did you help him?" "Because he needed help. You did not know him. That usually makes no difference." Vincent became quiet. Streetlights moved across his face as the car traveled through Manhattan. People in my world rarely do something without calculating what comes back. That sounds exhausting. It is efficient. Those are not the same thing. He looked at me. You disagree with me often. You hired the woman who told you no. I am beginning to understand the consequences of that decision. I smiled, but he did not look annoyed. If anything, he seemed lighter. When we reached my building, Vincent opened the car door before I could. "Tomorrow is free," he said. "No appearances. You remembered I have work. You have an event installation at 9. I stared at him. "How do you remember all of this?" His answer was simple. "I listen when you speak." I stood on the sidewalk after the car disappeared into traffic, looking at the ring on my hand. 7 days had passed. 23 remained. For the first time, that number did not feel reassuring. It felt like a countdown. The night I finally understood Vincent Callahan, I realized power had never been the thing protecting him. Distance was. By the middle of our second week, the rules of my temporary life had become strangely familiar. I worked at the flower shop in the mornings, handled my event clients in the afternoons, and stepped into Vincent's world whenever our agreement required it. He never complained about my schedule. He never asked me to cancel work for him. If anything, he seemed almost determined to prove that my life still belonged to me. That Thursday, Daniel Reed told me we were attending a community dinner in Queens. I expected another room filled with expensive suits and careful conversations. Instead, Vincent's car stopped outside a modest brick building with a blue sign above the entrance. Children's drawings covered the front windows. Inside, volunteers were setting folding tables while families gathered for dinner. "What is this place?" I asked. "The Callahan Community Foundation," Daniel said. I turned toward Vincent. "You have a foundation?" "Apparently. You could have mentioned it. You never asked." I followed him inside, expecting the room to change when people recognized him. It did, but not the way private clubs changed. A woman near the kitchen smiled and called, "Vincent, you are late." I looked at him. "Someone just told you that you were late." I heard her. "And she survived." He gave me a dry look. "Your confidence is becoming a problem. You started it." For the next 2 hours, I watched a version of Vincent I had never seen. He knew volunteers by name. He asked a college student about an application she had mentioned months earlier. He remembered that an older man preferred coffee without sugar. Nothing about it felt performed. There were no cameras, no reporters, nobody important enough to impress, at least by the standards of the rooms Vincent usually occupied. That was what made it matter. Later, I found him alone near a hallway lined with photographs. One showed a much younger Vincent standing beside a woman with the same gray eyes. "Your mother?" I asked. His expression softened. "Yes. She started this place?" "The first version of it." He looked at the photograph. "She believed influence meant very little if it only made your own life easier." I smiled faintly. "I think I would have liked her. She would have liked you." The words came so naturally that neither of us spoke for a moment afterward. "Why does nobody know you do this?" I finally asked. "People know. Not the people who write about you. I do not do it for them." I studied him. "You really hate being understood, do you not?" His eyes moved to mine. "Understanding gives people information." That sounds exhausting. You said that before. Because you keep proving it. Vincent looked back at the photograph. I trusted someone once who knew exactly what mattered to me. When circumstances changed, that knowledge became leverage. He did not explain further. He did not need to. His voice told me enough. "So you decided caring was dangerous." I decided showing it was. I thought about his condition. Suddenly, it sounded completely different. "That is why you said it." He knew what I meant. "Sophie, do not fall in love with me." I repeated the words quietly. "You were not warning me about you." His jaw tightened slightly. "Do not turn this into something it is not." "Then tell me what it is." For once, Vincent Callahan had no immediate answer. Somewhere beyond the hallway, dishes clinked and someone laughed. He looked toward the sound, then back at his mother's photograph. People cannot use what you never give them. I understood then. His rule had never sounded like fear because Vincent had spent years teaching fear to speak like control. I stepped beside him, leaving enough space between us that neither of us had to move away. That might protect you, I said, but it also guarantees nobody can stay close. His eyes met mine. The silence lasted several seconds. Then he said, almost too quietly to hear, I know. That was the moment the conditions stopped feeling like a warning. It became a confession. And with 16 days left on our agreement, I realized I was no longer afraid of entering Vincent Callahan's world. I was afraid of how much I wanted him to let me see the parts of it he kept hidden. I thought the worst thing Vincent Callahan could hide from me was his past. I was wrong. The worst thing was discovering how much of mine he already knew. By day 25, pretending had become almost effortless. That frightened me more than any room filled with powerful strangers ever had. I knew when Vincent needed silence, and when silence meant he wanted me to stay. I knew Daniel Reed would bring coffee before difficult meetings. I knew Vincent kept his mother's photograph in the community center because that was where he remembered her best. And somewhere between dinners, quiet car rides, and conversations neither of us planned, I had stopped counting the days. Then Daniel reminded me. 5 days remaining, he said one Tuesday morning. We were in Vincent's office reviewing our final 2 appearances. Vincent had been called into an unscheduled meeting downstairs. I know, I said, although I had deliberately avoided thinking about it. Daniel placed several folders on the conference table. There is another problem. His tone made me look up. What kind? People connected to the alliance Vincent refused have started asking questions about the marriage. What questions? Where you met? When the relationship began? Why nobody knew about you before the gala? My stomach tightened. Because there was nothing to know. Exactly. Daniel opened one folder. We are managing it, but you should be aware. His phone rang. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. I gathered my papers, accidentally pulling another folder from beneath them. It fell open on the floor. My name was printed across the first page. Sophie Miller. Below it was a date. I stopped breathing for a second. The date was from before the gala. I picked up the folder. My address. My business. My family's flower shop. Public financial records. Professional references. Nothing felt illegally obtained, but that did not make the discovery hurt less. Then I found a short note attached to the first page. Subject observed assisting junior hotel employee during vendor dispute. Refused additional payment. No apparent awareness of Callahan presence. I read it twice. Vincent had seen me before I stopped him in that hallway. He had watched me help someone when I thought nobody important was looking. Daniel returned and froze when he saw the folder. Sophie, how long? His expression answered before his voice did. Vincent should explain this. How long, Daniel? The preliminary check began that evening. I pointed at the date. Before he asked me, Daniel shook his head. The first note was made before your conversation. The full background review came afterward, before the written agreement. That distinction mattered logically. Emotionally, it barely helped. So when he offered enough money to save the flower shop, he already knew exactly what I needed. The compensation was based on the arrangement. That is not what I asked. Daniel became quiet. I closed the folder carefully. Every small moment returned to me differently. Vincent remembering my schedule, knowing my mother had an appointment, understanding how important the shop was. I had believed those things meant he listened. Maybe he did. But now I could not tell where listening ended and research began. Vincent entered several minutes later. He looked at me, then at the folder in my hands. His face changed. Barely. But I knew him well enough now to see it. Sophie, did you choose me before you spoke to me? He did not insult me with a lie. I noticed you before we spoke. Because I helped someone. Yes. Then you investigated me. After I made the offer, I had Daniel verify who I was bringing into my life. I held up the folder. You learned exactly how much money my family needed. Yes. The word landed heavily between us. And you never thought I deserved to know that? Vincent stepped closer, then stopped when he saw me stiffen. He stayed where he was. I was trying to protect both of us. By knowing everything about me while telling me almost nothing about you? His silence was the first answer that truly hurt. I removed the ring, not from my finger, but only far enough to look at it resting against my palm. 5 days ago, it had felt like a countdown towards something I was afraid to lose. Now it felt like a question. Was I ever Sophie to you? I asked. Or was I just the safest solution you could find? Vincent's control finally cracked in the smallest possible way. His eyes lowered to the ring. At the beginning, he said quietly, "You were a solution." My chest tightened. Then he looked directly at me. "The problem is, you stopped being one a long time ago." The moment I finally walked away from Vincent Callahan, he taught me the one thing I had never expected from a man like him. He let me. The folder remained between us on the conference table, but it felt heavier than paper. Vincent stood several feet away, exactly where he had stopped when he noticed me pull back. 5 days remained in our agreement. Until that morning, part of me had been afraid of reaching the end. Now I was afraid I had misunderstood everything that came before it. "You said I stopped being a solution," I told him. "When?" Vincent looked at me for a long moment. "I do not know. That is convenient. It is the truth." I turned toward the windows. Manhattan stretched below us, bright and indifferent. "Was the flower shop part of your calculation?" "At the beginning, yes." At least he did not lie. Somehow, that made it hurt more. "You knew what I needed, Vincent. You knew exactly how difficult it would be for me to walk away from that offer. I knew the money would matter. And you used that." His jaw tightened. "Yes." The admission left nowhere for either of us to hide. "I told myself I was giving you a choice," he continued. "The contract protected your right to leave. Daniel made sure every boundary was clear. I thought that was enough. But you had information I did not have." "Yes." "That is not equal." "No," I turned back to him. For once, Vincent Callahan was not defending himself. That almost made the conversation harder. "You control rooms without asking," I said. "You move meetings. You know what people want before they say it. You prepare for every possible outcome. That is how I survived my world. I am not your world." Something changed in his face. "I know that now." "Do you?" My voice remained steady even though my hands did not. "Because somewhere along the way, I started believing you listened because I mattered. Now I have to wonder how much you already knew before I ever said anything." Vincent looked down briefly. "I cannot change how this began." "No, but I can tell you what changed." I waited. "You argued with me when everyone else agreed. You treated people the same whether they could help you or not. You walked into rooms designed to make people feel small and refused to become smaller. And every time I expected you to care about my name, you cared about the person standing behind it instead." His voice lowered. "None of that was in a file." My eyes burned, but I refused to look away. "That does not erase the file." "I know." He reached into his jacket, then stopped himself before his hand moved any farther. "Tell me what you want." The question surprised me. "I want the agreement to end today." Silence. Vincent had negotiated with people who controlled companies, families, and fortunes. I had watched entire conversations bend around a single sentence from him. I expected a counteroffer, a reason to reconsider. Instead, he nodded once. "All right." My throat tightened. "That is it. You asked to leave. And you are just letting me?" His eyes held mine. "If I only respect your choices when they benefit me, then I never respected them at all." I looked at the ring on my finger. Slowly, I removed it and placed it on the conference table beside the folder. The small sound it made against the wood seemed impossibly loud. Vincent looked at it, but did not reach for it. "The remaining payment will still be transferred," he said. "I do not want it." "Then it will not be." No argument. Again, I picked up my purse. At the door, I stopped. Part of me wanted him to call my name. Another part knew that if he did, I might turn around. He stayed silent. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Daniel was waiting near reception. He looked at my empty hand, then at Vincent's office behind me, and understood. "Do you need a car?" he asked. "No, I need to walk." Outside, the afternoon air felt colder than I expected. I walked for blocks without checking where I was going. Vincent had spent his life proving he could make people stay. That day, for the first time, he proved something harder. He could care about someone enough to let her leave. I thought walking away from Vincent Callahan would end the story. Instead, it was the first decision that forced both of us to stop pretending. 5 days passed. The original agreement expired without a phone call, a message, or a black car waiting outside my building. I returned to the flower shop, answered client emails, carried buckets of roses across the workroom, and tried to convince myself that ordinary life still fit the same way it had before Vincent. It did not. On the 6th morning, Daniel Reed came into the shop carrying nothing except a cup of coffee. "If that is paperwork, I am hiding," I said. "No paperwork." He placed the coffee on the counter. Vincent ended the alliance negotiations. I stopped trimming a stem. How? Directly. He told both families that his future would not be negotiated through marriage, yours, or anyone else's. I looked at Daniel. He did not need me. He decided he should never have needed you for that. The words followed me for the rest of the day. Vincent had solved the problem without using me as a shield. More importantly, he had done it before asking anything from me. 3 evenings later, I was locking the shop when I saw him across the street. No driver beside him. No Daniel. No carefully arranged meeting. Just Vincent in a dark coat beneath the amber light of a street lamp. He waited until I noticed him, then crossed only after I gave a small nod. You were standing outside a flower shop? I said. I noticed. Your reputation is getting worse. The corner of his mouth moved. I have survived worse. Silence settled between us. It was different now. There was no contract underneath it. Daniel told me about the alliance. Vincent looked mildly annoyed. Daniel talks too much. He thought I should know. He was probably right. I folded my arms. Why did you do it? Because you were right. I had never expected those words to come so easily from him. About what? I used you to avoid a decision I should have made myself. He looked toward the shop window, where white roses stood in silver buckets. I spent years believing control prevented mistakes. Then I met someone who made me understand that control can become the mistake. I swallowed. That sounds suspiciously like personal growth. Do not make this more difficult. I thought difficult was your specialty. This time he smiled. A real one. Then it faded. Sophie, I did not come here to ask you to forget what happened. Good. And I did not come to explain it away. I waited. Vincent reached into his coat. For 1 second, I expected the ring. Instead, he pulled out nothing. His hand simply returned to his side. The gesture told me more than the ring could have. I spent most of my life learning how to make people listen, he said. You taught me how to ask. My chest tightened. Vincent took one slow breath. Would you have coffee with me tomorrow? I blinked. Coffee? Yes. That is your grand plan. There is no plan. I stared at him. That might have been the most unbelievable thing Vincent Callahan had ever said. No contract. No. No 30-day deadline. No conditions. His eyes held mine. None. I looked at the man who had entered my life believing every uncertainty needed to be controlled. He had offered me money, protection, rules, and exits. Now he stood on a sidewalk asking for 1 hour and offering nothing except honesty. 7 o'clock, I said. Vincent did not move. Is that a yes? Do not ruin it. A quiet laugh escaped him. 7 o'clock. The next evening, I met him at a small coffee shop 6 blocks from my apartment. No private room. No carefully dressed audience. No ring on my finger. We talked for 2 hours. Not about alliances or appearances. About my business. His mother. My family. The community center. Things we had never had time to ask when we were busy pretending to know each other. When we stepped outside, Vincent looked at me. What happens now? I smiled. Now you stop deciding everything in advance. He nodded. I can try. That is enough for tonight. He could influence rooms filled with powerful people. He could make entire conversations change with a sentence. But the lesson that changed him had nothing to do with power. A person can be protected, persuaded, even impressed, but a heart can never be commanded. It has to be given a reason to stay. And this time, when I walked beside Vincent Callahan, I was not playing his wife. I was simply Sophie Miller, choosing my own direction, while he finally learned how to walk beside me.